Hi everyone, I'm Mike Palmer. Welcome to Project 2025 Briefly Explained. In today's webinar, we will briefly summarize what the Heritage Foundation and other conservative groups want to do to our federal government if Donald Trump is elected president. I've set this up as a conversation between me, Jennifer, and Mark. Jennifer is a fictional journalist and Mark is a fictional teacher. Say hello, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. I work for a regional newspaper and want to learn more about Project 2025 to be able to write articles about it for our readers.
And I'm Mark. I teach social studies in our local high school and want to be able to answer my students' questions about Project 2025, but don't have time to read or digest the 920-page document I've heard about.
Well, Jennifer and Mark, you've come to the right place. In the next hour, you'll get a comprehensive summary of what Project 2025 is all about.
Can you sum it up in a few words?
Sure. Let me ask Desi Liddick of The Daily Show to do that for us.
So last year, the Heritage Foundation put out a policy for him. It's called Project 2025, and everyone's talking about it. It's really having a brat summer. It's essentially a blueprint for transforming the government from a neutral bureaucracy to a conservative Death Star.
A conservative Death Star? Is it really that drastic?
Well, as Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation and author of the foreword to the 920-page Mandate for Leadership, put it, they do want to destroy much of the executive branch of the federal government.
That on January 20th, 2025, which is the inauguration day for the next president, we believe at Heritage that a conservative, whether it's President Trump or someone else in the field, will replace President Biden, thank goodness. And it isn't enough for whoever that is to govern conservative tactically. They have to wake up every day and say, what part of the American administrative state am I going to destroy today? Not reform, not modify, not tweak, destroy. Fire the bureaucrats, close agencies, end, as is my pet project, the U.S. Department of Education. As I've said in American media this year, there is, I believe, as a conservative, a role for a Federal Bureau of Investigation. I don't think there's a role for the current one. It is proven, not just in how it's treated President Trump, but heck, for people like me, Latin Mass-loving Catholics, where they have seated FBI agents in the pews in our churches. It is time, as I said, to select all, delete the federal code for the FBI, and start from scratch.
Another way to see Project 2025 is that its authors want to use the federal government as a tool to impose the conservative program on the American people. Here again is Desi Liddick of The Daily Show.
Project 2025 plans to remake the entire federal government into an organ of the conservative movement.
So let's turn now to the big picture overview. The Project 2025 website says that the program has 4 pillars, what we might think of as 4 sections of the project. Pillar 1 is the policy book called Mandate for Leadership. This is the 920-page document you've probably heard about. As they say on their website, the goal is to deconstruct what they call the administrative state, which most people call the executive branch of the federal government. Pillar 2 is the personnel database they've been assembling for the last year and a half. They say they have roughly 20,000 resumes from people who want to be part of the next conservative administration. Pillar 3 is the Training Academy. This consists of numerous online videos that the Trump loyalists who have been accepted into the personnel database can watch to learn how they can take over federal agencies after they have been hired. Pillar 4 is the secret 180-day transition playbook that the Heritage Foundation is writing for the first 6 months of the Trump administration. This will lay out how they want to go about taking over the executive branch. The 180-day playbook is not publicly available, so we don't know the specifics of what they intend to do.
Okay, that's a useful summary of the overall project. I suppose that most of the substantive program is laid out in Mandate for Leadership, the book you've been talking about. I've heard that it would bring about changes to the structure of government as well as put major policy changes in place. Can you tell us more about that?
You're right, Mark. Project 2025 wants to change the way our government operates, how power is allocated, and who has it. And they also are looking to achieve sweeping policy changes.
Yeah, I've heard that they want to prohibit medication abortion. You know, the pill that accounts for about 60% of all abortions today. And they want to do away with the Department of Education, abolish Head Start, and turn the Department of Justice into a tool Donald Trump can use to prosecute those he doesn't like and protect the criminal activities of his cronies.
That's all true, Jennifer. We'll get to it in a bit. First, though, let's focus on the structural changes to the federal government, which come in two parts. The first structural change is to the understanding of the powers and role of the president. The second is to the executive departments and agencies that Congress has established over the last century and more. So Project 2025 envisions constitutional and administrative changes to the structure of the federal government.
How could they make constitutional changes without amending the Constitution? I mean, that doesn't sound quite right to me.
I see what you're getting at, Mark. By constitutional changes, I'm talking about fundamental changes to the way the president sees his powers under the Constitution. This is not a change to the written document, but it is a major change to the way the document is interpreted, which would have the effect of changing how our government works.
Has anyone been talking about this recently?
As a matter of fact, Jennifer, President Trump talked about this on several occasions. You may recall his having said, "I have an Article 2 where I can do whatever I want."
Then I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president, but I don't even talk about that.
It's a thing called Article 2. Nobody ever mentions Article 2.
More importantly, Article 2 allows me to do whatever I want. Article 2 would have allowed me to fire him.
So it sounds
But
like
I wasn't going to fire. You know why? Because I watched Richard Nixon go around firing everybody, and that didn't work out too well. So very simply, Article 2 would allow me to do.
I could have done anything I wanted. I don't even bring it up because we don't even get there. Absolutely, I have Article 2.
It gives me all of these rights at a level that nobody has ever seen before. We don't even talk about Article 2.
You might well ask, what in the world is he talking about? What's an Article 2?
Let me take a stab at this. As a social studies teacher, I teach an introduction to the text of the Constitution. You may recall that the first article covers the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, and the powers they have. Article 2 is about the presidency, and Article 3 sets up the judiciary. So Article 2, Section 1 states, "The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America." Section 3 adds that the President shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Trump must have been talking about that in some way. But I don't see how that language gives him the right to do whatever he wants. How does he get there?
Well, Mark, this is all about what the phrase executive power means. Some people, including apparently President Trump, believe it means that the president has king-like power in the executive branch. He can hire and fire people throughout the 34 departments and agencies at will and dictate what they can and can't do. Others believe executive power in this context is that of a trustee who acts on behalf of a principal, much like the trustee who acts under the scope of a power of attorney.
Let me guess. When Donald Trump says he has an Article 2 where he can do whatever he wants, he thinks Article 2 makes him like a king, at least in the executive branch. How does he get to that reading? I mean, he's not known as a constitutional scholar.
You can say that again.
You're right, but back in the Reagan presidency, a group of conservative scholars started developing what they call the unitary executive theory of the presidency, which they say is what the framers of the Constitution wanted. Under the unitary executive theory, or UET as it is often called, all power in the executive branch is concentrated in the President. The President has ultimate authority over all administrative activities and decisions and has the power to remove employees of administrative agencies at will. For example, under this interpretation, the President can direct the Department of Justice to indict someone or to drop an investigation, or the President can tell the Federal Reserve to raise or lower interest rates. The President could tell the Federal Communications Commission to grant or deny a broadcasting license to a radio or television company.
That's pretty king-like, if you ask me. And you say Project 2025 promotes the unitary executive theory?
Not by name, Jennifer. The term does not appear in Mandate for Leadership, but the concept pervades the document. Centralization of presidential authority is key to the restructuring and reorganization of the federal agencies and the rollback of delegated powers that Project 2025 wants to achieve. The project also wants to limit congressional oversight and expand the appointment powers of the President, which we'll talk about in a bit. Project 2025 also foresees greater judicial deference to executive decisions and an expanded use of executive orders and directives. It foresees a more generous use of the President's emergency powers and wants to reform the civil service to make around 10 times as many federal employees subject to termination by the President as is currently the case. All of this effectively presumes that the President has unitary executive theory powers.
Well, does he? Is this a correct interpretation of the Constitution? Is our President really a king or queen?
No, Jennifer. The President isn't a king or queen. The unitary executive theory is unconstitutional. In the Constitution, the President is like a trustee, not a king. Accordingly, the President cannot do whatever I want, as Donald Trump puts it. Many scholars have studied this question in great detail. A former federal judge and now professor, Michael McConnell, who himself comes out of the conservative tradition, wrote a book that explores what the framers said and did in great detail. He concludes that they deliberately rejected the notion that the President had king-like powers. Other scholars have reached the same conclusion.
Does that mean that the President is like a trustee? Is there any scholarship that supports this view?
Yes, there is, Mark. Thanks for asking. This view is supported by substantial research, including the book by Gary Lawson and Guy Seidman, A Great Power of Attorney, Understanding the Fiduciary Constitution. We could spend a full session talking about what this means. In essence, the President has the responsibility to implement the laws that Congress passes, nothing more. Let's turn now to the changes that Project 2025 wants to make to the administrative framework.
You mentioned that the authors want to expand the number of federal employees that the President can hire and fire at will. How does that work?
You may recall that at the end of Donald Trump's presidency, he issued an executive order that established what's called Schedule F in the civil service system. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but it's important to understand the big picture. Under current law, the President appoints just under 4,000 federal employees, about 1,200 of whom are subject to Senate confirmation. The balance of the roughly 2.2 million federal employees are part of the competitive civil service system. That means that they must apply, meet the specified qualifications for the job, and be better qualified than all other applicants for the position. Under Schedule F, the President would appoint as many as 50,000 federal employees, well over 10 times the current number. He could fire any of these employees whenever he likes, and they wouldn't be subject to Senate confirmation. The purpose of expanding the number of political appointees is to allow the President to micromanage the work of the various agencies.
Wow. I'm not sure I know the practical effect of that change. In fact, I don't even know how the executive branch of the government is currently structured. I know there's a Department of Justice and a Department of Defense and so forth, but other than a rough idea, I don't really know what's going on there.
Maybe I can help out with this. In my social studies classes, I go over this a bit. It's actually important because the executive departments and independent agencies are the principal means of defending the country and providing key services to all of us. There are 15 executive departments. For example, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, and the Department of Commerce are all executive departments, and the secretaries of these departments make up the President's cabinet. Each of the departments was created by Congress for specific purposes. The President influences the broad discretionary policy direction of these departments. But the President does not manage them or tell people in the departments what to do. Congress created the 19 independent agencies to perform specific functions that are key to the operation of a modern, complex economy. Examples include the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Unlike the executive departments, the independent agencies are headed by commissions. The President appoints the commissioners, subject to Senate confirmation, but otherwise has no control over the operation of these independent agencies.
Thanks for that succinct summary, Mark.
That's all very interesting, Mike. But what does it have to do with Project 2025?
Good question, Jennifer. Let's listen again to Dr. Kevin Roberts, head of the Heritage Foundation, tell us what they want to do.
And on January 20th, 2025, which is the inauguration day for the next president, we believe at Heritage that a conservative, whether it's President Trump or someone else in the field, will replace President Biden, thank goodness. And it isn't enough for whoever that is to govern conservative tactically. They have to wake up every day and say, what part of the American administrative state am I going to destroy today? Not reform, not modify, not tweak, destroy. Fire the bureaucrats, close agencies, end, as is my pet project, the U.S. Department of Education.
And Paul Dance, who until recently led Project 2025, said they want an army of trained conservatives ready to take over the departments and agencies on day one.
But what we're doing is systematically preparing to march into office and bring a new army of aligned, trained, and essentially weaponized conservatives ready to do battle against the deep state.
I understand that the Heritage Foundation is a think tank. They can think all they want. What does President Trump say about all of this?
Okay, let's listen to what he had to say.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption once and for all, and corruption it is. First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively.
All of this reminds me of what happened in Poland, Hungary, and Turkey in recent years. In each case, an autocrat flooded government ministries with loyalists and cronies who hollowed out democratic rights and freedoms. These agencies of government became tools for imposing the will of the autocrat on the people of the country.
You're right, Mark. I recently wrote an essay on Project 2025 and the path to autocracy, in which I summarized an article by Professor David Dreesen of Syracuse University on those three countries. And Anne Applebaum has published several books and articles on the subject, including Twilight of Democracy, in which she describes the events in Poland, where she was a first-hand witness. In a recent broadcast, Olivia Troy, who worked in the Trump administration, described the anxiety she and other federal employees felt when President Trump issued the executive order establishing Schedule F.
Joining me now is Olivia Troy, former Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence and member of the new voter outreach group, Republicans for Harris. Olivia, great to see you again. You know, one of the things I learned from my parents who were involved in politics when I was very young, is that in a functioning point of the civil service is that you can elect different leaders and they can come and go, but the system stays relatively steady because experts, generally speaking, who are not driven by ideology, keep the government working. Project 2025 wants to undo that largely.
Yes, exactly. And look, at someone who was a civil servant for a very long time. I started my career in Republican politics. I was a Bush appointee back in the day. And then I joined the civil service and the intelligence community, and I served under the Obama administration. I got to tell you, Allie, like the way that public service is painted now, that is just not the reality. Not once did the political, partisanship enter my mind when I was working on a policy that was for the greater good of Americans. I served at the Department of Defense. I served at the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Energy. Every single day, my colleagues got up every single day and worked on policy and helped to support the American people, even in crisis situations, which is really what the focus of the civil service does. And it's expertise on how to make everything run so that when we have to respond to a crisis, we know how to come together. We know how to actually discuss the options, and we can push out the relief that is necessary for Americans if that's one of the things that is needed.
But they can replace all of these positions. And by the way, I don't know if you need to replace 50,000. You just let a few thousand go, and it sends the message to the rest of the workforce that you're now working for me, not for the government of the United States of America.
Yeah, I want to be very clear about this, Allie. This Schedule F order, this was drafted, as you said, in 2020. I saw the draft when it was being enacted early on in 2020, and that is when they started to replace national security experts on the National Security Council with loyalists. And, I was warned about it from my boss and from the National Security Advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence. I was told to keep my head down, and I was told that in the end, hopefully, I would be okay. And the reason that was stated to me was because they knew that I was committed to serving in the Homeland Security and counterterrorism role in a very factual, matter-of-fact way. I worked day and night to ensure that I was presenting the facts and also responding. I worked on the disaster relief that you mentioned whenever there was a hurricane or floods or California wildfires. But the concern here with this Schedule F was that in situations when Trump did not want to send relief to a blue state, if those people that are serving in a nonpartisan way get replaced by loyalists, that is what's at stake here, is that it will no longer be a government working for the greater good of the people and providing this relief. It will be we're not going to send relief like they did during COVID, right? I lived that firsthand, where they were playing partisan politics. I will be very clear, Mike Pence was not, but we had no control over what was going on in that Oval Office where they were doing partisan politics when they were sending supplies and relief to states based on how they had voted. And I think that is a very dangerous thing here. And I think that Americans really need to understand that. Because when, let's say Donald Trump gets upset with a Republican governor along the way, and he's back in the Oval Office, I can assure you that his vengeance will overtake in the moment, and he will forget about the fact that these are just Americans in need right there. And he will be vengeful, and he will keep that relief from going out. And it'll be the partisan loyalists in charge that are going to be dictating responses and policies like that. And I can name numerous scenarios across the board where that is likely to be the case.
Let's turn now to Pillars 2 and 3 of Project 2025. Remember, there are 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is the 920-page Mandate for Leadership. Pillar 2 is the Personnel Database. Pillar 3 is the Training Academy. Pillars 2 and 3 are designed to create an army of Trump loyalists, as Paul Dans says, weaponized to upend the executive branch of the federal government starting on day one. In this section of the webinar, we discuss how they plan to go about doing that. Under 5 U.S. Code Section 3331, all government employees, except the President, take the same oath to the Constitution. Jennifer, why don't you read the text of the oath for us?
Sure thing. It goes like this. I, Jennifer Anderson, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God.
Thanks. Note that this is an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and not an oath to an individual or even to the country. Dictatorships tend to impose an oath of personal loyalty to the dictator. For example, in Nazi Germany, all soldiers swore an oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler personally, and not to Germany or a constitution. Project 2025 seems to be pursuing a middle path. They want their army of loyalists to be loyal to the president's agenda. Here is how Spencer Chrétien, Associate Director of Project 2025, puts it.
It's been debated in various conservative administrations over the years, loyalty versus experience. There are good arguments that loyalty and ideology in political appointees are more important than experience. President Nixon supposedly said that he preferred experienced people. President Reagan rejected this false dichotomy. While it's true that different administrations have different priorities, one thing is clear. If a president gets the wrong personnel who are not loyal to his agenda, he will pay a steep price. We've seen that over and over again.
Later, Chrétien makes clear that you can be a political appointee in a Trump administration so long as you're aligned with the president.
If you want to be a political appointee, you can be a political appointee if you're aligned with the president. You don't need a master's in public policy. You don't need to have spent your career in Washington, D.C. You don't need to have written 40 academic articles. You don't need to have litigated billion-dollar cases or argued in front of the Supreme Court. The career federal HR bureaucrats don't decide who's qualified to be a political appointee. PPO decides who's qualified to be a political appointee. The president was elected by the people to exercise the executive authority vested in him by the Constitution. He outsources some of that authority to PPO, and PPO hires political appointees who are going to get the president's work done.
Chrétien makes clear that there's only one qualification needed to work in a Trump administration: loyalty to the president.
The bottom line is that if you're smart, if you're willing to work hard, and if you share the values of the president, PPO is going to like you. And PPO is going to get you into the administration one way or another. We'll find you the right seat on the bus.
This approach to hiring political appointees in a president's administration is not altogether new. In fact, the Domestic Policy Council was set up in 1993 under the Clinton administration, among other things, to ensure that domestic policy decisions and programs are consistent with the president's stated goals, and to ensure that those goals are being effectively pursued. What is new is the order of magnitude. Heretofore, only about 4,000 federal employees were expected to pursue broad policies consistent with the president's goals. Now, however, as many as 50,000 employees at lower levels of department and agency work will be bound by such policy considerations.
I can see how that might lead technical experts to skew technical decisions to make sure they line up with what the president wants. Or, as Olivia Troy told us, technical experts will be asked to engage in political payback or revenge against states, or entities that have incurred the ire of the president.
That's right, Jennifer. A story from the end of World War II illustrates the point. Following the Normandy invasion in June of 1944, the Allies worked their way through France and then started advancing through Germany on their way to Berlin. At Remagen, they crossed the Rhine. News of this crossing made its way to German headquarters, where an adjutant reported it to Luftwaffe General Hermann Göring. Göring responded that the Allies had not crossed the Rhine. The adjutant went away and confirmed that, yes, indeed, the Allies had crossed the Rhine and he came back to Goering with that confirmation. Goering again responded that the Allies had not crossed the Rhine. After checking the facts once more, the adjutant returned for a third time with the same news, to which Goering replied, "The Allies have not crossed the Rhine. That's an order."
I guess the lesson from this story is that facts don't obey orders, and things can go awry when people in positions of power try to ignore them.
Wasn't there something like this in the Trump administration? I seem to recall something about a hurricane and a map that someone in the White House had altered to make it conform to what President Trump had said.
That's correct, Jennifer. Here's a news clip on that incident.
But that was the original chart, and you see it was going to hit not only Florida but Georgia. It could have was going toward the Gulf. That was what was originally projected, and it took a right turn.
Again, falsely claiming Alabama was in the path of Hurricane Dorian when he said so on Sunday.
It may get a little piece of a great place. It's called Alabama, and Alabama could even be in for at least some very strong winds, and something more than that it could be.
The president showing reporters in the Oval Office an altered map Wednesday with a black line crudely extending the cone of the hurricane track to include Alabama. But a similar map released last week did not include the mark. It's a crime to alter official government weather forecasts. The president initially made the claim about Alabama on Twitter Sunday morning, but it was debunked by the National Weather Service office in Birmingham just 20 minutes later, reassuring Alabama will not see any impacts from Dorian. We repeat, no impacts from Hurricane Dorian will be felt across Alabama. Sources tell CNN there was a discussion about the early models of the storm before Wednesday's briefing, and that a White House official in the room drew on the map to show that Hurricane Dorian could have been much worse. A source familiar with the Oval Office briefing would not deny the president drew the black Sharpie line in the map. However, the president later denied knowledge of the alteration.
And that map that you showed us today looked like it almost had like a Sharpie.
I don't know.
Afterward, the president tweeting this map to try to bolster his argument. But that image is dated August 28th, before the forecast became clearer and 4 days before the president's initial tweet. In small print at the bottom, a disclaimer reads, NHC advisories and county emergency management statements supersede this product.
Remember what Olivia Troy said.
But the concern here with this Schedule F was that in situations when Trump did not want to send relief to a blue state, if those people that are served in a nonpartisan way get replaced by a loyalist, that is what's at stake here, is that it will no longer be a government working for the greater good of the people and providing this relief. It will be we're not going to send relief like they did during COVID, right? I lived that firsthand, where they were playing partisan politics. I will be very clear, Mike Pence was not. But we had no control over what was going on in that Oval Office, where they were doing partisan politics when they were sending supplies and relief to states based on how they had voted. And I think that is a very dangerous thing here, and I think that Americans really need to understand that.
So that's how Pillars 2 and 3 of Project 2025 want to destroy the executive branch of the federal government, as Kevin Roberts put it. Now let's take a look at some of the policy changes that Project 2025 wants to put in place to achieve the same goal. One of the most disturbing set of policies revolves around the author's belief that unmarried mothers, and any kind of marriage other than one between a man and a woman, are the sources of most of the country's problems. Hey, I'm not making this up. Liz Dye of the Legal Eagle explains.
But as always, the devil is in the details. And you don't have to scroll very far to figure out what those details are. Because on the very next page, these guys tell you very clearly that they think America's problems could be solved if everyone would just get married and stay that way. Who's to blame for what ails us? Unmarried mothers, because there is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. That's a bold claim, although they cite no source for it.
Project 2025 envisions two types of policy changes. The first are structural policies, and the second are policies that affect civil rights. Remember, they want to destroy the executive government.
They have to wake up every day and say, what part of the American administrative state am I going to destroy today? Not reform, not modify, not tweak, destroy.
Project 2025 seeks to make sweeping changes to the Department of Justice. They want to completely demolish the Federal Bureau of Investigation and rebuild it somewhere else in the country. They want to disintegrate the Department of Homeland Security and distribute some of its parts to other departments. And they want to abolish the Department of Education altogether.
Those are dramatic changes. Is that it, or do they want to make other changes of this nature? I've heard they want to do something to efforts to combat climate change. Is that true?
Unfortunately, Mark, it's all too true. They want to systematically remove all efforts to solve the climate change problem, and in a move reminiscent of Hermann Goering, they want to get rid of every reference to climate change in any policy, memorandum, directive, or order in every department and agency of the federal government.
Climate change, allegedly, is everywhere. This is an issue to pay attention to as it has infiltrated every part of the federal government. Now, when I think of climate change, I immediately think of population control, don't you?
No, I don't. No, I don't think of population control when I think of climate change, you weirdo. I think of forest fires and Smokey Bear and his tight little bear bod, like a normal American woman.
I guess if we just issue an order, weather will go back to normal. Fires will stop consuming millions of acres of forests. Glaciers will stop melting. And the average global temperature will stop rising. Who knew we could solve the climate crisis so easily?
Well, maybe they want to wish the weather away too, because they want to dissolve the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which collects the data and prepares the weather forecasts you get on the nightly news. They believe this work could be better handled by the private sector.
I'm gobsmacked. They really do want to destroy the executive government. Maybe it won't matter if the president is a dictator. There won't be much left for him to dictate to.
Having read through the document, I can understand how you might feel that way, but it doesn't stop there. They want to eliminate the political independence of the Department of Justice, curtail the Civil Rights Division, revamp law enforcement priorities, and handcuff the department in election oversight matters. As I mentioned, they want to dissolve, decentralize, and relocate the FBI and increase presidential control over it. They want to prevent it from investigating corruption and civil rights violations. They want to restructure and eliminate some divisions, and they want to reshuffle the leadership.
You said they want to abolish the Department of Education. But if they're not able to do that, do they have any plans to revise what it does?
Yes, they do. They want to promote voucher programs for private schools, eliminate federal funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, redirect federal education funding to conservative programs, reduce or eliminate federal aid programs, reduce funding to universities that promote leftist thinking, stop federal involvement in curriculum development, and promote patriotic education.
What other structural policy changes do they have in mind?
Well, we've talked about some of them already. They want to create an autocratic presidency, destroy congressionally created administrative agencies, upend civil service with Schedule F, reverse climate policy, deport immigrants, and repeal the Affordable Care Act. They want to deregulate energy, deregulate finance, reshape the federal judiciary, reform foreign policy and defense, and pass tax cuts for billionaires.
You said a bit ago that they want to bring about policy changes that would affect civil rights. What have they proposed?
This is only a partial list. They want all agencies to pursue anti-abortion policies. They want to make pornography illegal, eliminate federal funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, enable religious groups to discriminate against LGBTQT plus individuals, curtail LGBTQT plus rights, especially in the military, prohibits social media companies from deplatforming conservative voices, emphasize patriotic education in schools, counteract progressive ideologies, defund the arts and culture programs, repeal no-fault divorce laws, and give tax benefits to married couples.
Wait a minute. I thought the regulation of marriage and divorce was entirely a state matter. How does it get to be federal policy?
Marriage and divorce are state law matters. You're right about that. But I suspect they think they can use federal money to force states to repeal no-fault divorce statutes. I'm not sure. Let's give Liz Dye of the Legal Eagle the last word in this section on what they are proposing to do if Donald Trump is elected.
But remember like 20 minutes ago when we said these guys want to ban porn? Well, they do. In fact, they want to throw anyone who makes or distributes pornography in jail. Here's what Roberts said about it in the foreword to Project 2025. Pornography, manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. Okay, it's a lot. First of all, pornography is 100% protected by the First Amendment. In a 1969 case called Stanley v. Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment protects the right to private possession of pornography. The court held unanimously that if the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business telling a man sitting alone in his house what books he may read or what films he may watch. Our whole constitutional heritage rebels at the thought of giving government the power to control men's minds. And in a 1973 case called Miller v. California, the Supreme Court articulated what became known as the Miller test. Under the First Amendment, the government can only ban speech if it's obscene. And they don't mean obscene like gross. They mean that you can only ban materials which, quote, appeal to a morbid interest in sex as opposed to a healthy interest in sex, which depict or describe in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And the material must, taken as a whole, lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. And while the Project 2025 guys may have a moral objection to pornography, that doesn't mean they can outlaw it. So don't go deleting your browser history just yet. But let's cut the BS. They don't really intend to shut down half the internet and shutter the billion-dollar porn industry, and you know that because the second part of that quote talks about arresting teachers and public librarians for distributing it, which is something that is not happening. When was the last time you walked into a school library and said, "Miss Sparkle, can you please take me to your X-rated movie section?" That's not a thing. But what is a thing is Florida's Don't Say Gay law that tried to make it a crime for school libraries to carry books that had gay or trans characters, or for teachers to talk about gender identity, or to even acknowledge that gay people exist. Roberts talks about children suffering the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. And pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. He's not trying to ban porn. He's trying to ban anyone who treats LGBTQ plus people like they have a right to exist in society. We're back to the pronouns again. But this time, if you use them right, they'll put you in jail. So much for local control and keeping government out of your business.
That's the overview of the main features of Project 2025. We haven't covered everything, of course, and several aspects of the project could be discussed in more detail. Our Stop Project 2025 website looks at other aspects of what the authors of this project want to achieve. But let's move now to a general assessment of the project as a whole. I brought in Greg and Danielle to summarize the main characteristics, which are the us versus them framework, the mean-spirited tone, the puritanical influence, the unscientific assertions, and the anti-democratic nature of the entire undertaking. Greg, why don't you get us started by describing the way Project 2025 frames everything as us versus them?
Sure, Mike. As one reads through the Mandate for Leadership document, it is striking how everything is framed in adversarial terms. The authors do not present their arguments as something that would be good for the country as a whole, or that would benefit everybody, or that would have democratic value. Instead, they target liberal ideas and the government itself as the enemy. They are the good guys and liberals in government agencies are clearly the bad guys. They make it clear that they want to destroy the administrative state, as Dr. Roberts puts it. So, Project 2025 evidently wants to overthrow the existing government and replace it either with nothing at all, or with tools for controlling the lives of citizens so that they live in the way that the authors think best.
Danielle, can you share your views on the tone that pervades the document?
Yes, I can do that. The Mandate for Leadership document is best characterized as assertive, partisan, and directive. It maintains a consistent tone of ideological commitment throughout, with little attempt at neutrality or bipartisanship. The authors use strong language to criticize opposing views and advocate for a conservative agenda, creating a document that is more of a rallying cry than a dispassionate policy discussion. In the introduction, Dr. Roberts sets a combative tone, framing the document as a call to action against what he describes as the damaging policies of the left. He uses strong assertive language to rally conservatives to adopt the Project 2025 agenda. There is little attempt to reach across the aisle or engage with opposing viewpoints in a conciliatory manner. Instead, the tone is confrontational, underscoring a clear us versus them dynamic. Throughout the document, the tone remains consistently partisan and ideological. The tone towards those who might disagree with the agenda is generally dismissive or confrontational. The language is often emotive and charged, particularly when addressing topics like federal bureaucracy, immigration, and social issues. The framing of political opponents or those with differing viewpoints is generally negative, painting them as obstacles to be overcome rather than partners in governance.
Greg, would you please share your impression of the puritanical bias of Project 2025?
I'd be happy to do that, Mike. You may recall that the famous investigative journalist, H.L. Mencken, once defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be having fun. From working through Project 2025, I get the sense that many of its authors, including Dr. Roberts, may be tormented by that fear. They want to take us back to a time when men were in charge of everything and women stayed at home, had babies, kept house, and welcomed their men home to a delicious meal. And if the women displeased the men were free to beat, abuse, and rape them with impunity. The Puritans wanted to purify the church from all remnants of Catholic idolatry and corruption, and they also wanted everyone to live morally chaste lives according to their understanding of chastity. Those who didn't comply were compelled to wear a scarlet A on their chests. The worldview that comes through Project 2025 is more at home in the 17th than in the 21st century.
Thanks, Mark. I'll share my thoughts on the unscientific nature of Project 2025. I could present a 1-hour webinar on this aspect of the project, which is, in my view, a fatal flaw. Throughout the document, the authors make statements such as the one by Dr. Roberts shown on the screen. Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. I don't know whether some of these statements are true or even if the whole thing is, but Dr. Roberts does not cite any empirical studies or other sources that substantiate the statement. One gets the impression that he makes this assertion merely as a way to bolster his statement that unmarried mothers are a social problem. One of the hallmarks of modern government in advanced societies is reliance on provable facts, scientific knowledge, and technical competence in all government programs. This is true in Canada, Germany, France, England, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and every other advanced society, including the United States. We have learned from Stalinism, Maoism, fascism, and Islamic theocracies that it is unwise to let non-falsifiable ideologies dictate how to run an economy. For example, Scholars believe that the Great Famine in China under Mao between 1958 and 1961 was the result of a mixture of natural disasters and man-made blunders. 70% of the causes were decisions dictated by communist ideology, such as the collectivization of agricultural production. Contrary to Hermann Goering, you can't order facts out of existence because you don't like them. The real world does not run on Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts. When you require government to operate based on non-falsifiable ideologies, you get technical incompetence. Bad things happen. Neither unqualified cronies nor ideological true believers should be telling the Fed whether to raise or lower interest rates or how to manage the money supply. When Spencer Chrétien says that alignment with the president's agenda is the only qualification for political appointees, implicitly suggesting that technical competency, that is, subject matter expertise, is not a requirement, I get concerned that we will end up with another Michael Brown in charge of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Before taking over FEMA, heck of a job Brownie, as he became known after the disastrous response to Hurricane Katrina, worked as FEMA General Counsel and was a close friend of the former head of FEMA with no previous experience or expertise in emergency management. It is telling and ominous that Dr. Roberts and other authors of the Project 2025 playbook make unsupported, sweeping statements about major social problems, relying mostly on religious and political beliefs without citing any scientific studies either for their diagnoses of social problems or for the solutions they propose. It reminds me of the cardinals of the Inquisition under Pope Paul V in the 17th century, ordering Galileo to publicly state that the sun revolved around the earth, not vice versa. Danielle, I heard you say that Project 2025 is itself an assault on democratic processes. Can you explain?
Certainly. Democracy is a process more than an outcome. Democracy is a way of making decisions about things that affect all of us. We do it by considering different possibilities in small and large gatherings. In school, churches, civic organizations, political parties, and public forums. Over time, we hash things out together. At the end of the process, we choose a course generally by voting. This is the democratic way of establishing public policy. It can get pretty messy, but as Churchill said, it's better than all other forms of government. In the case of Project 2025, however, a private group has established its own policy agenda, which it has not put forward for consideration by the public at large or even political parties. Rather, it has styled this project as a package of policies and people that it wants to install wholesale if a conservative is elected president. Its authors want to ignore Congress and install this program by presidential fiat using the unitary executive theory that we discussed earlier. That's just not a democratic or constitutional way of making public policy and developing governmental institutions.
Thanks for that comment, Danielle. I'd add only that Project 2025 represents a radical departure from the principles and structures that have governed the United States for over 2 centuries. It is a comprehensive plan to reshape the government in a way that consolidates power, undermines democracy, and threatens the rights and freedoms that are the foundation of our republic. I hope everyone listening agrees that Project 2025 should not be put into practice by any president. But what can you do to keep that from happening?
Well, first, please subscribe to Stop Project 2025, a website that contains many more resources on Project 2025 and related issues.
You can also download, read, and share the resource guide that comes with this webinar.
Yes, and use those resources and what you've heard here today to teach others.
There will soon be a training program called Project 2025 Explained. You can complete that program to get an even better understanding of Project 2025 and its implications for our society.
And, as I tell my students, remember to vote and get others to vote. In this election, we'll be choosing between democracy and autocracy. Make your voice heard by voting.
Finally, stay tuned for the training kit that is coming soon that you can use to help friends and neighbors understand Project 2025.
Before we go, here is a list of other resources, links to which are included in the resource guide that comes with this webinar.
These are newsletters on Project 2025. We mentioned Stop Project 2025 already. But you might want to check out Andra Watkins' Substack, How Project 2025 Will Ruin Your Life. A best-selling author, Andra escaped from a Christian nationalist upbringing and brings that perspective to Project 2025. Thomas Zimmer's Democracy Americana contains long-form essays on Project 2025 and other aspects of American democracy.
This is a list of organizations that have different perspectives on Project 2025. Media Matters, the Brennan Center for Justice, Democracy Forward, the Brookings Institution, Truth Out, ProPublica, the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, the Center for American Progress, Human Rights Campaign, Common Cause, and the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm sure there are others as well.
So, thanks for watching. I hope you found this information helpful. And now let's roll the credits. Bye-bye, everyone.